Hi friends, today we shall learn about portfolio theory. The topics covered will be portfolio management process, concept of risk and return, quantification of risk and return, covariance and correlation, diversification and its benefits, and concept of beta. Let's begin with the introduction. Portfolio refers to the range of investments held by an individual. This may include a mix of financial assets such as stocks, bond and cash equivalents. It may be managed by an individual himself or by financial professionals. The base of building a portfolio solely depends on the risk appetite of the investor. It may also consider the time horizon of investments with reference to individuals' goals such as retirement planning, planning for family, their education, asset building, and so on. The rise in education, income, and awareness about new products and market trends has definitely augmented the risk-bearing capacity of individuals in lieu of faster and better returns. Thus, investment management refers to primarily assessing the risk tolerance and time horizon of investors and subsequently spreading the disposable incomes over a varied assets in order to optimize the risk and return. Let's understand the meaning now. Portfolio management deals with the process of selection of securities from the number of opportunities available with different expected returns and carrying different levels of risk. The selection of securities is made with a view to provide the investors the maximum yield for a given level of risk or for a given level of return. Thus, portfolio management is practiced as an investment management counseling, which is advice to seek assets that would grow in value in tandem with the risk element involved in it. Let's go through the portfolio management process. Step 1. Specification of investment objectives and constraints. The first task is to weigh the relative importance of various goals of an individual like capital appreciation, regular incomes, and safety of principal. Next is to assess the factors affecting his investment decisions like time constraints, tax constraints, liquidity, etc. This will give a fair view of his risk-bearing capacity. Step 2. Choice of asset mix. Assets broadly are a mix of risk and return. It is basically concerned with proportion of stocks like equity shares or equity-oriented mutual funds and bonds like fixed investment options. Step 3. Formulation of portfolio strategy. There are broadly two portfolio strategies. Active strategy refers to an aggressive approach striving to earn superior risk-adjusted returns by gauging the market timing, sector rotation, or security selection. Passive strategy refers to selection of an asset mix with predetermined level of risk exposure. Step 4. Selection of securities. Generally, stock selection is based on analysis of fundamentals of the organization. Bond selections are based on maturity, credit rating, liquidity, and tax aspects. Step 5. Portfolio execution. This is the stage where actual buying and selling of securities is done. Step 6. Portfolio revision. The market being dynamic does not move on a predetermined trend. Hence, there may be fluctuations in prices of stocks and bonds. Hence, portfolio revision may be done in order to reap the benefits of certain changes or reduce the risk affecting a said portfolio. Step 7. Performance evaluation. Periodic assessment of portfolio is to be done to calculate returns received with reference to the risk taken. It is a continuous activity which will not only increase the financial wisdom of an investor, but also upgrade the quality of his portfolio. Now friends, let's see the various factors affecting selection of securities. Since the task of choosing between various securities seem to be a daunting task, it is important to understand the factors affecting the same. The major factors which should be deliberated upon in selection of securities are: number 1, return. In case of stocks, the companies with stable fundamentals and growth orientation should be chosen. Such stocks shall yield regular dividend income to investors. The bonds or fixed income vehicles should be able to produce fair returns as the risk is also narrow. Number 2, capital appreciation. Aggressive investors look for short and long-term gains arising out of market volatility. Conservative investors will opt for long-term wealth building. Speculative investors generally aim for short-term gains where high level of risk is involved. Number 3, form of return. The form of return may be expected in 2 ways: periodic receipts such as cash dividends in case of stocks and interest incomes in case of bonds, bank deposits, etc. Capital gains refers to the difference between purchase price and selling price of an asset. Number 4, safety and security of funds. The fund should be safe and secure at the time of redemption. Number 5, risk. Risk avoidance and risk minimization are the primary factors affecting portfolio management. By proper planning and careful vigilance over market movements, the risk factor can be controlled. Number 6, liquidity. Certain portion of investments should be put in fairly liquid assets so as to face emergencies. Number 7, tax considerations. Any individual's first choice of securities rests on the tax implications. The securities that minimize his tax burden would find a place in his basket of securities. Friends, let's get into the details of concept of risk and return. Since portfolio management is a risk-driven concept, it is important to understand the concept of risk so far investment management is concerned. Sometimes a decision can lead to more than one possible outcomes. Such situations are beset with uncertainty when it is not known exactly what will happen in future. Hence, the actual return may be different from that of expected. This is called risk. The difference between risk and uncertainty is that uncertainty cannot be quantified, but risk can be quantified on the basis of likelihood of outcomes. Risk can be categorized into 2 types. Systematic risk. It refers to the variation in return caused by factors that affect the price of all securities. They can be social, political, and economic changes. Generally, it has a similar impact on prices of securities and is unavoidable. Such risk can be due to following reasons. Market risk. Market risk refers to overall changes like recession, demonetization, tense political situations, etc. Interest rate risk. It refers to changes in general level of interest rates in the market. Inflation risk. It refers to general upward movement in commodity prices, reducing the purchasing power of investors. Unsystematic risk. It refers to the factors that are unique to a firm or an industry. For example, if the prices of rubber will increase, the tire industry will get affected. Recently, the problems in Tata Group of companies may bring certain changes in prices of Tata stocks. This risk can be hedged by portfolio diversification. Technically, individual risk is studied as the variance or the standard deviation of its return, and the same is for the portfolio as well. Now, let's get the concept of risk and required return. The expected rate of return of an investment reflects the return of an investor anticipates receiving from an investment. The greater the risk, the greater would be the compensation expected. Investments that carry low risks generally offer low returns in comparisons to the ones which involve high risk. The figure here indicates risk-return relationship. Risk is measured along the horizontal axis and increases from left to right. Expected rate of return is measured on the vertical axis and rises from bottom to top. The diagonal line illustrates the concept of expected rate of return increasing as level of risk increases. Most of the portfolio theories assume linear relationship, but in developing countries like ours, such relation may not hold true. The figure here depicts the risk-return relationship with investor perspectives. The figure here indicates the return per unit of risk required by all investors. Highly risk-averse investors would have a steeper line and vice versa. The figure here depicts risk involved with reference to various security options available in the market. The figure here represents yields of different financial instruments. Certainly, higher yields involve higher risk element. The investors may have a mixed bag of investments in their portfolio depending on their risk tolerance and financial acumen. Now friends, let's understand how risk and return can be quantified. The mean of the probable returns gives the expected rate of return. Standard deviation or variance, which is the square of standard deviation, measures risk. Higher the range of likely return, higher the standard deviation, and so higher is the risk meant for aggressive investors. Lower the range of likely returns, lower is the standard deviation, and so lower is the risk meant for conservative investors. So now, the key of portfolio management lies in obtaining a trade-off wherein standard deviation is minimized without sacrificing much of return. Here, the only answer is diversification. For example, the shares of X Limited gives a return of 30% and shares of Y Limited gives a return of 35%. The standard deviation of X and Y Limited is 0.15 and 0.2 respectively. So, if we invest in X Limited, there is a risk of 15% and a return of 30%. And for Y Limited, the risk is 20% and the return is 35%. Now, thinking as a risk-taking investor, if we diversify, that is, if we invest 40% of amount in X Limited and 60% amount in Y Limited, the expected return of the portfolio will be 0.4 multiplied by 30 plus 0.6 multiplied by 35, which is equal to 33%. Standard deviation of the portfolio will be standard deviation P is equal to under root 0.4 whole square multiplied by 0.15 whole square multiplied by 0.6 whole square multiplied by 0.2 whole square, which gives us the standard deviation of 13.4%. This means that the risk is reduced to 13.4%. Spreading of investments across various assets may reduce risk further and produce optimal returns, but it cannot bring down the risk to zero. So, the principle again is not to hold all the eggs in one basket. This itself is vital to portfolio management. It is basically a risk management strategy wherein various assets are combined to reduce overall risk whilst getting expected returns. To understand the creation of an efficient portfolio, that is one that allows the firm to achieve maximum returns for a given level of risk or to minimize risk for a given level of return, the concept of covariance and correlation has to be learnt. To develop the equation for calculating portfolio risk, we need information on weighted individual security risks and weighted co-movements between the returns of securities in the portfolio. Co-movements are measured by covariance, which is an absolute measure, and coefficient of correlation, which is a relative measure. Covariance reflects the degree to which the returns of two securities vary or change together. A positive covariance means that the returns of the two securities move in the same direction, and negative covariance means that they move in the opposite direction. Covariance in this example is calculated in 4 steps. Step 1. For each scenario and investment, subtract the investment's expected value from its possible outcome. Step 2. For each scenario, multiply the deviations for the 2 investments. Step 3. Weight this product by the scenario's probability, and step 4. Sum of these weighted products to arrive at the covariance. Let's understand an example. There are 3 scenarios. Scenario 1 is boom times, the probability of which is 0.3. The deviation of investment 1 from its expected rate of return in this boom time is 0.18. The deviation of investment 2 from its expected rate of return is minus 0.16. The product of the deviations will be minus 0.028. Weight multiplied by the probability will be minus 0.00864. Scenario 2 is a normal time, the probability of which is 0.5. The deviation of investment 1 from its expected rate of return under normal scenario is minus 0.02. The deviation of investment 2 from its expected rate of return in normal time is minus 0.06. Product of these deviations is 0.0012. Weight multiplied by probability is 0.00060. Under scenario 3, which is recession, the probability of the same is 0.2. The deviation of investment 1 from its expected rate of return is minus 0.22. The deviation of investment 2 from its expected rate of return is 0.39. The product of these deviations in recession times is minus 0.0858. Weight multiplied by the probability is minus 0.01716. Hence, the summated weights will bring a covariance of minus 0.02520. Since the calculations produce a negative covariance, there is a tendency for the returns on the portfolio to co-vary in opposite directions. The covariance formula for 2 assets now is covariance of asset A with asset B is equal to summation PS, which is probability of economic states, RAS, return for asset A for the th period, minus ERA, that is expected return for asset A, multiplied by RBS, that is return for asset B for th period, minus ERB, expected return for asset B. Here S is equal to number of different states, that is boom, normal and recession period. Correlation is the statistical measure of association. If the pair of securities displays negative correlation of returns, then in circumstances where one of the securities is performing badly, the other is likely to do well. So, the average return on holding 2 securities is considered little safer than investing in one alone. Correlation coefficient is equal to covariance of 2 assets returns divided by standard deviation of asset 1 multiplied by standard deviation of asset 2. Correlation is equal to covariance xy divided by standard deviation of x and y. If the correlation coefficient is plus 1, that means perfect positive correlation between 2 assets return. One return will vary in the same direction as the others. Minus 1, that is a perfect negative correlation between 2 assets returns. one return will be in the opposite direction as the others. 0, that shows no correlation between two assets' return, no relation between both the returns. By investing in assets that are less than perfectly correlated cash flows, risk can be gotten rid of, that is, reap the benefits of diversification. For example, investment E and F, the standard deviation are 5% and 3% respectively. Assuming that portfolio consists of equal investments in each, that is, W1, that is weight 1, is equal to weight 2 is equal to 50%. This table shows correlation between two assets' return. Under the first case, where correlation is +1, the covariance is 0.00150 and the portfolio standard deviation is 4%. Where the correlation of two assets is +0.5, the covariance is +0.00075 and the portfolio standard deviation is 3.5%. When the correlation between two assets' returns is 0, the covariance is also 0 and the portfolio standard deviation is 2.92%. When the correlation between two assets' return is -0.5, the covariance is -0.00075 and the portfolio standard deviation is 2.18%. When the correlation between two assets' return is -1, the covariance is -0.00150 and the portfolio standard deviation is 0%. The less perfectly positively correlated are two assets' return, the lower is the risk of portfolio comprised of these assets. The less perfectly positively correlated are two assets' return, the lower is the risk of the portfolio comprised of these assets. Beta coefficient. In finance, beta of an investment indicates the measure of volatility or systematic risk. It is also called beta coefficient. Beta represents the tendency of a security's returns to respond to thumps in the market. In general, a beta less than 1 indicates that the investment is less volatile than the market, while a beta more than 1 indicates that the investment is more volatile than the market. Volatility is measured as the fluctuation of prices around the mean, the standard deviation. For example, if a stock's beta is 1.2, it's theoretically 20% more volatile than the market. Conversely, if an exchange traded fund's beta is 0.65, it is theoretically 35% less volatile than the market. Therefore, the fund's excess return is expected to underperform the benchmark by 35% in up markets and outperform by 35% during down market. The beta factor is the correlation coefficient between the returns of the market portfolio of investments and the returns on a particular stock or investment. So, the beta measures an investment's marginal contribution to the risk of the market portfolio. It is important because it measures the risk of an investment that cannot be reduced by diversification. It does not measure the risk of an investment held on a standalone basis, but the amount of risk the investment adds to an already diversified portfolio. Mathematically, the beta coefficient of a security is the security's covariance with the market portfolio divided by variance of market portfolio. A slight modification helps in building another key relationship which tells that beta coefficient equals correlation coefficient multiplied by standard deviation of stock returns divided by standard deviation of market returns. Beta coefficient is given by the following formula. Beta coefficient is equal to covariance of market returns with stock returns divided by variance of market returns. Beta coefficient is equal to correlation coefficient between market and stock multiplied by standard deviation of stock returns divided by standard deviation of market returns. Friends, let's understand beta of a market portfolio. If the return from the market portfolio rises or falls, we should expect a corresponding rise or fall in the return from an individual share. The amount of this rise or fall depends on the beta factor of the share. The beta of a portfolio is a weighted average of all beta coefficients of its constituent securities. Beta of a portfolio is equal to summation Wi Bi, where the range of I starts with 1 and ends with n, where Wi is the proportion of given security in a portfolio, Bi is the beta coefficient of a given security, and n is the number of securities in a portfolio. Assume there is a portfolio XYZ consisting of 3 stocks in the following proportions: 40% of stock X with beta A is equal to 0.85, 35% of stock Y with beta A is equal to 1.1, 25% of stock Z with beta A is equal to 1.35. The beta coefficient of a portfolio XYZ is 1.0625. So, the beta of XYZ portfolio is equal to 0.4 multiplied by 0.85 plus 0.35 multiplied by 1.1 plus 0.25 multiplied by 1.35, and we get a result of 1.0625. The interpretation of the key values of beta is shown like this. Beta less than 0 means return of a security drives in the opposite direction from the market return. A negative value is very rare for long positions but is normal for short positions. Beta is equal to 0. That means there is no correlation between a security's return and market returns. For example, 0 beta coefficient has fixed income securities because the return does not depend on market return movements. Another example is cash under the condition of 0 inflation because its value does not change over time unlike market returns. If beta is between 0 and 1, return of a security moves in the same direction as the market return, but its volatility is less than market volatility. If beta is equal to 1, the security return and the market return move in the same direction and have equal volatility. If beta is greater than 1, the return of security moves in the same direction as the market and has a higher volatility than the market return. Let's list the uses of beta. Apart from measuring volatility, beta is also used for stock selection. To use the beta for stock selection, general market outlook for the future is assessed. If the market indicates an upswing in future, stocks having larger betas would be constructed. If it shows a downswing in future, stocks with negative betas are added. But so far, Indian investors' aptitude is concerned, they are not satisfied with the use of betas, as neither do they hold a diversified portfolio nor do they give weightage only to systematic risk. Unsystematic risk also affects the Indian markets to a great extent. Friends, let's summarize the session now. In this session, we learnt about the concepts of portfolio theory. Basically, it is a risk-driven theory which helps the investors maximize their returns. This session also explained as to how to manage the portfolio of investments to achieve a specific financial goal. All the factors that need to be considered while selecting a security were also described. Diversification is the strategy used by majority investors and hence the technical aspects of the same were discussed. The said strategy would prove to be successful when concepts of beta coefficient, correlation and covariance are considered. The session also included the usage of these measures for portfolio management with the help of few illustrations and interpretation of the results. Thank you, friends.